Those scenes you just watched are from demonstrations throughout Israel on Saturday night, although what we've shown you is mainly in Tel Aviv. And what's it all about? Well, listen to me and Jonathan Conricus. Here we go. Lieutenant Colonel in Reserves, Jonathan Conricus. It is Saturday, March 22nd. I find myself in my hometown of Toronto, just after 3 in the afternoon, which makes it just after 9 in the evening where you are in Israel. How are you today?
I'm well, all things considered, and somewhat eager to try to make sense of what's going on in Israel and around it.
As are we all. And I flew out on Friday morning, and it was amazing, even for the 12, 15 hours that I was in the air and in transit, what went on. It's hard to know where to start because so much is going on, but we have to start somewhere, and I'm going to choose the Gaza Strip. On Sunday, the government of Israel decided to instruct the IDF to resume attacks on Hamas in the Gaza Strip. It was air attacks primarily for the first few days, and then additional ground troops were added to the force. What's going on there, and why do you think the government decided to go in at that time?
So, what I think is happening is that the Israeli government is frustrated by lack of developments and by Hamas's continued ability to refuse to give over to release hostages. There are 59 hostages left in Hamas captivity. We assume that between 20 and 24 are still alive. Most of the assessments that I've heard are either 22 or 23. And since the prime minister decided to dismantle the Israeli negotiations team, take out the professionals and appoint politicians, we've seen very little progress. And Hamas is hardballing, probably emboldened by Egyptian support and by the Egyptian counter-proposal to Trump, and by the fact that they're not in a rush to do anything and to concede anything, because there's no shortage of anything and there's no real pressure on Hamas. They have food, they have water, they have electricity. Nobody's really pressuring them. And when they scan the horizon and look at where things are going strategically, ever since Egypt continued to have Hamas's back and to ensure that whatever happens in the so-called day after, there's a place for Hamas and Hamas won't be uprooted. And most importantly, Egypt will continue to actively prevent Palestinian civilians from leaving at their own discretion, from fleeing the battlefield and fleeing the horrible place that is now the Gaza Strip. Since that is the situation, then Hamas isn't really motivated to give in to Israeli demands. And what the Israeli government is trying to start to apply pressure by using military capabilities, very limited in scope, very gentle, relatively speaking. The strikes against senior Hamas officials, most of them administrators and heads of the internal police and other oppressive parts of Hamas that are those who lead the government. Those were the ones who were targeted. Hamas also acknowledged that 4 or 5 senior Hamas officials were killed, and that has importance. That is not a deal breaker for Hamas, but it has importance. And since the beginning of this week, Hamas has also started to return fire towards Tel Aviv, fire towards Ashkelon, and they've triggered a few alarms in the Gaza envelope area. So we're seeing an escalation of sorts, which still is very, very limited. Israel hasn't pulled out most of the breaks yet, but interesting, I think, is a comment made by Defense Minister Katz, where he said something that I think is a very troubling statement, and it can get Israel in a lot of trouble, whereby he says that if hostages aren't released, Israeli troops will go in, conquer, and take terrain. Take as in hold on to and take it away from Hamas. And not just go in and hold terrain. And the whole insinuation here is that Israel will start to annex land in Gaza. And that is a if that is indeed a new strategy, then that's a significant deviation from what Israel has been doing before. Whenever the world comes back from a weekend and from dealing with other hotspots in the world, then I think this will be very focal, and all of Israel's critics will, I'm sure, be rallied by this very much, and will claim that this was the Israeli target all along, and it's now becoming apparent what the Israelis are doing, that Israel isn't defending itself, but it's out for Palestinian land, and it'll fall like a very ripe fruit into the hands of the those that are against Israel and those who support Hamas. So what I'm seeing is that we have now Israel has decided to shake the tree and see if anything falls down. So far, nothing's falling down, and Hamas is not yielding to the pressure, which leads me to believe that we will see additional escalation in the use of force, and we will see additional strikes in Gaza. We will see more ground troops. What we have on the ground now is still very minimal, but I think we will see more ground troops. I think the first stage will be to cut the Gaza Strip into two and to enhance the presence in the south, the Rafah area. Those will be the two first things that Israel will do. The most important thing is cutting the Gaza Strip in two in the so-called Netzarim corridor. Once that happens, that will be probably will force Hamas to respond, and may see some action as a result. And from there, we'll see how things develop.
We can't discuss the IDF going into the Gaza Strip without touching on the domestic political situation in Israel. Because even though politics is not your wheelhouse, usually, I think we agree that the decision to go in was very political. It's always political, of course, because a political government runs things, but I'm going to suggest more so in this case. And why? And I just want to kind of set the table and ask you to comment, because we have a situation where the budget had to be approved by the end of the month, March, where there was a very significant increase in the allocations for various institutions and programs that are of critical importance to the ultra-Orthodox and to religious Zionists. And those two camps, if I can put it that way, support this coalition. And then there's also Itamar Ben-Gvir and his Otzma Yehudi party, and Prime Minister Netanyahu clearly wanted him back inside. He wanted his votes so that he had a much more comfortable majority in the Knesset. So what coincided with Israel, the IDF going back into Gaza, were all of these allocations for niche programs, I will call them, ultra-Orthodox educational institutions, things like that. And Ben-Gvir and his party were brought back into the coalition. And we know that the terms of them supporting the coalition and being in the coalition are that the IDF not stop military activity in Gaza, that they continue to pound Hamas, for lack of a better word. They support annexation. They support settlement, as do the religious Zionists. And they've made it very clear repeatedly that the price to free the hostages is too high. And they say, we have to go in, we have to stay in, we have to destroy them. And if the price is that these 22 or 24 still living hostages are murdered, well, that's what we have to do. What's your understanding? What's your view of the various factors that went into this? So Benjamin Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu, wanting to keep his coalition strong and solid. And to do that, he had to bring back in Ben-Gvir and show that he was prepared to attack, and to forego, for now, any negotiation to release the hostages. There's that. And I'm not sure, what's on the other side supporting going back in militarily. I suppose the view that somehow military force will free the hostages, that's a view I don't share. You may tell us how you kind of boil it all down?
No, I think your analysis makes a lot of sense, and I share a lot of the thinking behind it. I think in general, this government has proven to be very poor at managing the war, at defining priorities, and distinguishing between the more important and the less important. The news cycle here is dominated by various activities of of this government, which are not conducive to winning the war. They're dealing with many other things, whether it's exempting ultra-Orthodox or military service. They call it the Enlistment Act, but it's anything but. It's basically the exemption from military service. They are busy with firing or getting rid of what many people refer to as gatekeepers, head of the ISA, Ronen Bar, and the Attorney General. And these are things that, for me, look to be totally out of place and very irrelevant to what should be, in my mind, at the top of priorities, which is to defeat Hamas and then to get on to defeating the Islamic Republic of Iran and ensuring that we have a prosperous and safe future for ourselves and for our children and grandchildren. And I am not happy with how the government is dealing with things, how it is prioritizing. I am not happy with the fact that we have fringe elements that are dictating policy for the future of Israel. And most importantly, many of those that today are voting whether or not to send soldiers into battle, their children don't serve. They themselves didn't serve in the IDF. They never were in combat, and they never served anything beyond political goals, and they're not sending their children to the IDF. And I have a serious issue with people sending others into battle that they themselves never have taken part of or have any intention of doing. So that's one part. Second part is with regards to, you speak a lot, we speak a lot about hostages. And hostages, yes, are extremely important. That is a moral obligation that we have, that the state, the military, the decision makers, everybody has in order to get our people back. And that is something that is extremely difficult to do, given the failure of October 7 and the fact that Hamas was able to take hostages. But that is nevertheless something that Israel must do in order to maintain that social commitment and bond that binds us all together. Failure to do so will have, and already is having, significant social effects on the social fabric and the basic commitment between citizens and the state. However, in my mind, and this is why I'm very frustrated with the government, we should be thinking about winning the war. In my mind, this war doesn't end with the return of hostages. This war ends with a complete eradication of Hamas. It ends with a totally different landscape in Gaza, and it ends with Israel dictating the terms and stipulating what goes and what doesn't go in Gaza. That's how I want to see this war end. That, in my mind, is the only way that the war that started with such an atrocious attack on Israel on October 7, that's the only way it can end. And what I'm troubled by is that, many people, they kind of get sidetracked and they focus on one part of what we need to do, which is to get back the hostages, which I agree on is of superior moral importance, and it has to be done. But then they kind of forget that, well, even when we get the hostages back, and hopefully we will get the live ones back, we still have to defeat Hamas. There's still a lot of work to do in order to really fundamentally change the situation that we're in. Otherwise, we'll find ourselves in similar or perhaps worse situations in the future. And what bothers me, again, with this government is I see no plan, I see no strategy, and I see mismanagement of capabilities and assets, and a lack of strategy. We are almost a year and a half after the war. We have spent tremendous capital. We have lost hundreds of soldiers, about 15,000 wounded, almost 7,000 of them severely wounded, with amputees, double amputees, and soldiers that are suffering from tremendous trauma. More than 900 civilians killed and thousands wounded. All of this, and a year and a half has passed, and we still have not achieved a decisive victory over a militarily inferior enemy. And most of that is because of how the government has been managing its affairs internationally and militarily. And I believe that had we had different leadership with different priorities and with more clarity of what needs to be done, defeat the enemy, get hostages back, and move on to bigger and more important enemies like the Islamic Republic of Iran, that is what I think we should be focusing on. And that is what really angers me that we're not focused on.
So I do have to speak up, for those out there like me who prioritize at this point in time the rescue, repatriation of, in particular, the living hostages, but of all hostages, because I don't think that it's accurate to say that we don't think that Hamas should be destroyed and pushed out of the Gaza Strip, completely defanged, destroyed, a la PLO when it was forced out of Beirut in 1982. But I think that, and I speak for myself, but I know that many agree. And frankly, the polling for the last few weeks is showing us resoundingly. It's now more than 80% of Israelis who believe that we must bring the hostages home. That is the priority. And the
Yep.
price will be grotesque. We know that. Just get them home. Do live up to our moral code and then take care of business.
Yep.
So that's how I would kind of reframe it. I want to just sort of focus again on another really important political issue. And I think that when international, commentators and pundits and analysts look at Israel, they don't focus as much as they should, in my view, on the domestic instability and issues. And right now, you mentioned in your comments the efforts being made right now by the government to fire the head of the Shabak, the Internal Security Service, Ronen Bar, and also the Attorney General, Gali of Miara. The Shin Bet went to the Israeli Supreme Court to argue that the government's decision to fire the head of the Shin Bet, which, by the way, is unprecedented in Israel's history, that their decision to do this, never mind at this time, is not in accordance with the law and must be reviewed. And the government's response has been, in my view, appalling. We have Minister of Finance Bezalel Smotrich saying we don't have to listen to the Supreme Court. We don't have to follow their orders. We have other very senior members of this government making similar comments. And this is really where the rubber hits the road in a democracy. When you have members of the government, the highest levels, even suggesting that they may override a decision or a ruling of the Supreme Court, that is no longer a democracy. Why? Because that is no longer an independent judiciary.
Yeah, it becomes an irrelevant judiciary if the executive branch doesn't execute what the judiciary interprets the law. And yeah,
Very serious. And I know that you're there. I'm not. I don't know if you went to any demonstrations tonight, but I understand that the streets were alive all over the place.
they were.
So tell us a bit about what's going on, because this is really serious. And minor detail, of course, there are outstanding warrants for the arrest of Prime Minister Netanyahu and former Minister of Defense Yoav Gallant with the International Criminal Court on charges of genocide and a few others. And their main defense to being hauled before the ICC or the ICJ, as the State of Israel has been charged in the International Court of Justice, the main defense is the principle of complementarity, which, of course, in a nutshell says, well, we don't bring countries before the International Court until they've exhausted, and, investigation in their own judicial system. And so one of the key, quote, defenses to being hauled before these tribunals is that we have our own independent judiciary. The government steps up and says, nah, we're overruling them. We're overruling the Supreme Court. As we just said, again, that is no longer an independent judiciary.
Yeah, I'm not so worried about his defense. I wish him, the best of luck in defending himself. I think the allegations are preposterous. They are totally out of bounds. It's a kangaroo court with no jurisdiction that is on a crusade against Israel. And I think that any allegation or any indictment, they are, in my mind, they are void and they are without any legal standing. They're preposterous.
I agree.
Unfortunately, they
I
stand.
have to say, I have to say, I totally agree with you with respect to the quality of the international judiciary,
Yeah.
the ICJ and the ICC. Having said that, I mean, this is a really significant issue.
Yeah, it's a significant issue, but it's not. I mean, it's on the rank of significant issues. I would put it at 9, and not 1. 1 is the health of the Israeli political system and checks and balances, and for Israel to continue to be a thriving liberal Jewish democracy in the Middle East. I think that's a topic number 1, 2, and 3. And Netanyahu's defenses and Gallant, good luck. I'm sure that they'll be okay. But bottom line, really, what is here at stake, in my humble understanding, is really, yes, Israeli democracy, where we're seeing Israeli legislators take extreme measures that, based on what I understand from the media, and I caution myself, knowing that I'm not in the room where decisions are made. I don't know. I don't know. I have my assessments and my feelings. What motivates Prime Minister Netanyahu to all of a sudden say, I have a serious issue of trust with head of Shabak, Ronen Bar. I can assess, based on the media, without being in the room, why this government wants to get rid of the Attorney General. But none of that really, for me, it doesn't make any sense. For me, it stinks. It looks very bad. It looks motivated by many wrong reasons and no right reasons. And I am worried by it. And I think that if the government continues to go down this path, it'll have tremendous
Mm.
social implications, and it will also affect the cohesion of the fighting capability of Israel. And that brings me back to what should be focus number 1: win the war, defeat the enemy. And that is what the government is currently doing, is degrading the ability to defeat the enemy and safeguard Israelis and get
Exactly.
Israelis home, because we are diverting our efforts into things that may be politically important for the government, but they are not factually important for the state of Israel to win the war and get our people back. And therefore, I think it is double or triple travesty what they're doing. And I really, really hope that someone will, have enough guts within the people that are close to the prime minister, and say, listen, I think we're taking this too far. Let's maybe reassess what we are supposed to be doing, what you are supposed to be doing as prime minister, and let's focus on first things first. Win the war, get our people back, start dealing with Iran in a more substantial way, and then we can do all kinds of monkey business and get rejected by the Supreme Court and do all matter of other things that may be, politically convenient in order to stay in control a few more months until the next elections. That's part of the democratic game, fine. But in my mind,
Mhm.
really, the focus should be on winning the war. And I think that that is lost. And I think that this week can be a very, very dynamic and tumultuous week, where we can see
Right.
strong countermeasures by civil society, by the political opposition, but most importantly by civil society, which is exactly the wrong thing to be doing in the middle of war. And just to be clear, responsibility on this lies squarely on the shoulders of the government, just like responsibility for what was going on in Israel prior to October 6th. the so-called judicial overhaul, or what some call it the judicial revolution that the government was leading. It created a lot of opposition and fear, and people were out on the streets, and we had all kinds of things going on in the military. People were not reporting for duty, and we had the strikes and many other things, signs of instability and unrest. I don't want to go back to that. And I think that we have to focus on what's important, and that is defeating our enemies, getting our people back, and starting to deal with Iran. So I think I share your concern, but I think that the motivation should be the longevity of this beautiful miracle that we live in, called the State of Israel. The third time that Jews are independently in control over the land of Israel in history. Hopefully, we'll be able to, overcome the curse of what was it, 85 years of self-governing
Yes.
that the Hasmoneans had. Let's hope that we will overcome that curse and really set the foundations for a long and prosperous independent Jewish state. These kinds of activities, I think, weaken us as a society, they weaken our resolve. Now, I'll say one last thing, which is kind of the devil's advocate in this conversation, but I think it's important to hear it because I think that many English speakers who listen to you and to other podcasts, and they read the Times of Israel and Haaretz for sure, they get a very one-sided picture of Israeli politics. It's important to emphasize that there is, sadly, strong political support for what this government is doing. In mandate survey after mandate survey, you made a reference to surveys before. Yes, there is overwhelming support across political boundaries to get hostages home and to prioritize that. But there is also, according to polls, solid support for Netanyahu and the Likud party. Maybe people are not happy with how he's leading the war, myself included, but that has not yet translated to a shift in the polls. And you can another thing that's important to emphasize is that the people that are out protesting are, in a nutshell, the same people who have been protesting on Balfour and Kaplan and who have been opposing this government ever since Netanyahu was elected the last time around. And that's something that I think we should be honest enough to acknowledge. And I've been out on the streets as an observer. I see the same people from the same parts of Israeli society, from the same ethnic, religious, and socioeconomic background, and it hasn't gotten across those divides yet, which means that it's still inherently a reaction against the political opposition to Netanyahu, and it's not really yet, I think, a more broad expression of Israeli society and the Jewish Israeli electorate. And I think we would be remiss if we didn't mention that. Last word about the Advocate General, Baharav Miara. Obviously, the government wants to get rid of her because she stands in the way of every type of out of bounds and wacky decision that this government tries to promote. She stands in the way, and she writes letters, and she informs the government of her interpretation of the law, which 99.9 times out of 100 is contrarian to this government. Now, I find myself agreeing with many of the things that she says, but I'm no legal expert. But if I try to put myself in the position of this government, who are saying, well, we were elected with a public mandate and we're supposed to govern. And we try to govern, but there's a system that keeps on undermining our ability to govern and to execute the types of policies that we said that we're going to do, and we're being prevented from doing so. And that is also something that I think we should keep in mind. I personally, as I've said very clearly, I think that this government is managing the war abysmally, and I have tons of criticism towards the priorities.
I know that the streets were full tonight in Israel. with many, many protests, not just in Tel Aviv, but all over. And there's significant talk of really turning up the heat with a full-blown strike by the Histadrut, the largest labor union in the country, and many other interests and groups. That's quite something when you have all of these groups coalescing to the degree they are at a time like this. So I hope the government pays attention. I think we're in interesting and very fluid times.
I think we have to mention one other topic, which I think is very relevant and extremely troubling, and I'll connect 2 points. I listened to Steve Witkoff's interview with probably the biggest promoter of anti-Semitic hacks in last year or two, Tucker Carlson. An hour and a half. I didn't watch all of it, but I watched the more interesting parts. Very, very troubling again to see the whitewashing of Qatar by a senior American official. And I was just trying. I struggled to maintain a straight face when I heard some of the things that Witkoff said. Decent people, well intentioned, that things were misrepresented, all kinds of things that to me sound 100% bizarre and extremely far from the truth. And frankly, they stink. They reek of behind the scenes interests that I find extremely worrying. And I connect that with Israeli politics because there's more and more information that indicates that not only have the Qataris been employing the same tactics that they've been doing and are doing around the world, of buying influence with money and hedging their political situation by influencing important people. There's apparently, according to the police arrests and the investigation that's going on, much more than meets the eye when it goes to Qatar and the Prime Minister's office. Nothing's been confirmed yet, and there's a lot of spins and a lot of partisan news reporting and questioning. But for me, it's extremely worrying that Qatar may have been able to infiltrate really the closest circle of power in Israel, the Prime Minister's office, and where they had people who were employed by the Prime Minister himself in certain very sensitive roles, also on the Qatari payroll. And I'm careful about what I say. That's really what I understand the situation to be so far, according to media reports, and yes, allegedly and reportedly, etc. But if that is true, that is extremely worrying, explosive, extremely worrying. It is abysmal, and I think should really, really cause everybody involved to really stop and rethink what they are doing, and really for security agencies like the ISA, headed by Ronen Bar, and the Israeli police, really to get to the bottom of it as quickly as possible. And I am really intrigued and confused by the fact that the person who allegedly has the superior interest to clarify and set things straight and to prove that there's nothing untowards going on within his closest circles and really to move on, and that's Prime Minister Netanyahu, I would have understood it to be within his interest to quickly invite an investigation and to make that, as transparent, as quick, and as effective as possible so that we can understand what's going on. And from his point of view, if everything is okay and everything is kosher, to show that, everything is okay and we can move on into, again, winning the war and getting our people back. That hasn't happened, and that is worrying and very troubling. And the fact that the government, as you spoke about, is also voted on getting rid of, firing the head of the ISA, head of the organization that is now investigating. That is very troubling and adds another layer of suspicion and reeking smell, which I hope will be will dissipate, but for the time being, very, very troubling.
So you've just like thrown red meat to a lion. I'm the lion. I have to just comment briefly. One is I shared your surprise at seeing Mr. Wetkoff go on Tucker Carlson. I was shocked by many of the things he said, chiefly the good intentions of the terribly misunderstood Qataris. And apropos your comment about, the fact that, well, to just get rid of all of the stench, one would expect that Prime Minister Netanyahu would say, there's nothing here. Come on in, investigate, do what you need to do, but let's clear up this mess, okay? Because we need to all be together and on the same page as a country. And he's doing, in fact, the opposite, which is very much the approach he's taken to demands for a state commission of inquiry. The fact that he's so strongly opposed to having a state commission of inquiry with subpoena powers and that would be able to question witnesses from every sphere of life, military, political, civilian, about the decades leading up to the war, because it is such a colossal disaster. But the prime minister has been opposed to this. So again, the same kind of thing. You'd think that he'd want to open the kimono, so to speak. But I also want to say that it may be obvious, but I think it's a point that bears mentioning and emphasizing that the timing of this firing of Ronen Bar, the head of the Shin Bet, and this move to terminate the Attorney General, Baharav Miara, coincidentally, not at all, it coincides with them taking very strong positions. Ronen Bar, head of Shabak, initiating this investigation into the conduct within the Prime Minister's office with respect to working with Qatar, supporting Qatari interests. And in fact, the Israeli media has dubbed it Qatargate. And the government is saying, no way, we're not letting Ronen Bar go on this frolic. We're going to just nip this in the bud. We were going to fire him anyway. Might as well do it now. Gali Baharav Miara, she's supporting the position of Ronen Bar and saying this direction, this decision by the cabinet is not legal. It cannot stand.
So has the High Court of Justice said. Yeah.
Exactly. And so, but they can't, they've tried to, they can't totally fire or expunge the High Court of Justice in one fell swoop, but they can sure take a good run at Ronen Bar and at the Attorney General, and that's exactly what they're doing. So the timing, I think, is very much linked to this Qatargate thing, which is, if true, explosive. Explosive. So, I mean, again, there's so much more to discuss. There's the Hezbollah and more Houthi, and it never stops, right? But we're
And
going to have
Iran.
to, and
Iran that
Iran.
keeps on ticking. Yeah. There's a lot to
So
discuss.
never a
Yeah.
shortage of content, but it's time and life that gets in the way. So I thank you again, as always, for sharing your time with us.
Thank
State of
you.
Tel Aviv listeners love you. And I always learn so much from speaking with you.
So do I. Thank you for having me on, and shalom.
Have a good week, and shalom. We love hearing from you, so please comment on our website, stateoftelaviv.com, or send us a note to hello@stateoftelaviv.com. On behalf of the State of Tel Aviv core team, Jan Zabo, our creative, graphic, visual, and marketing man, Amir White, producer and editor extraordinaire, sound guy, who is also impressively patient with me and my boomer tech deficiencies, and our social media manager, who pitches in on everything, Maya Naftalin. Thanks to the team. Thanks to you for being here. We'll be back soon.